I'm a cheater. I wasn't always a cheater though. In fact, for most of my art journey, I was almost neurotic about making sure I followed all of the rules about art. I never traced, I never heavily referenced, I never color picked from other people's art because I was terrified of getting called out by my peers. But these days, I'm a lot more flexible with how I do art. These things make all the difference in my art and take it from looking like this to looking like this. I'm going to show you some of my favorite ways to cut corners so you can skip to the fun parts of creating art instead of getting stuck on the tedious ones. I'm going to start with the most controversial of these methods, tracing. Tracing in any form has a long history of being considered taboo in the art community. I've been around the community for almost a decade, and it has been a hot topic for even longer than that. I think that in recent years, tracing has seen a sort of vindication. It's pretty accepted as an avenue to improve your art and study these days. But what I propose is tracing as a step in your art process. Now before you crucify me, let me provide a little context. I struggle a lot with anatomy, and for a long time this prevented me from making much progress with any of my work. I've put a lot of time into studying anatomy and practicing drawing bodies. I've gone through the figure drawings and the Loomis method and those stupid cubes, but nothing has clicked yet. Of course, I've learned a great deal from my time studying, but I realized that if I want to continue making art and not just study for months, I would have to find a workaround. Whenever I'm having trouble constructing a pose, I trace the construction lines directly from photos, anime figures, or 3D models. I usually get my references from Pinterest or this really awesome website that I recommend called Pose Maniacs. When I can't find a reference for a specific pose or hand position that I want, I'll take my own photos and trace over those instead. And you know what? I don't even stop there. I also heavily reference the photos when I'm sketching the character over the construction lines. If I remember to do so, there should be a clip of me demonstrating how I use these photos on the screen right now. Usually during this process, I don't find it necessary to credit the reference photo I'm using, as I change up several elements of the pose along the way, and it's not exactly common practice to credit every single reference you use for a piece. However, when the drawing doesn't change too much along the way, I will credit the photo as it makes up a good portion of the drawing. Something important to note, however, is that I don't take commissions nor am I paid for my art in any way. I'm not sure how the addition of payment into the equation would affect my method of heavily referencing, as I would be profiting off the piece. My struggle with anatomy is part of the reason I haven't opened commissions yet, as I simply don't feel comfortable taking them when I heavily reference other people's photographs when working, since I don't want to end up in any kind of nightmare controversy. I do want to add that this is by no means a substitute for learning to construct anatomy on your own, even though it is helpful for learning the way bodies work. It's pretty important to learn to be able to draw the human body without heavily tracing other images in this way, especially if you plan to be a professional artist, as you don't want to end up in a copyright disaster or hurt your reputation. But hopefully that goes without saying, seeing as this is a video on art cheats. Cheat number 2 has to do with shading. Shading is probably the most rewarding yet most tedious part of drawing. It can really bring the whole piece together, but it takes a lot of time, at least for me. So when I shade, I try to do it as lazily as possible without sacrificing too much quality in my work. I don't think too hard about where the light's coming from, I just do what feels right, and if it looks good at the end, then I consider it a success. I do take into account, to some degree, reflected light and subsurface scattering, but again, I don't think too hard about it. I shade just enough to make the character look less flat and make the forms look more three-dimensional. As long as the piece comes out looking rendered and put together at the end, then I consider it a success. I try not to overcomplicate my shading by adding different layers of shading on top of each other. I keep it pretty simple with just a highlight color and a shadow color. Sometimes I don't even use highlights, or I just reserve them for parts of the character that I want to appear extra shiny, like hair and certain textures of clothing. The third cheat is about sketching. I'm a big sketcher. I take ages while sketching because I just get really into it. But I'm not exactly Da Vinci, so as a human, it's difficult for me to sketch out forms that I don't have much experience in creating. A big way I cut corners here is by using thick line art or silhouettes to give the impression of a form, and going back in later to refine it. This started out as more of a roadblock for me, as since I'm sure any artist has experienced not having clear, defined shapes in a sketch can cause your line art to look really whack, but you can use this to your advantage if you do it correctly. You can use thicker lines to chip away at a form and make it thinner, or do the opposite and make it thinner without having to erase the whole thing and make new lines over and over again. This is particularly helpful if you're not great at line art to begin with, as it's kind of the opposite process. You essentially just get the shape down with thick line art and then erase parts of it until it looks right. It's kind of like sculpting. I often do this for parts of the head and clothing. You'll see a lot of people use the same kind of concept when doing those lasso art videos. They block out the shape of the thing that they're trying to draw and then weave back in to get rid of the inside to create line art. It's kind of addicting and satisfying to watch, to be honest. The next cheat is probably the most simple and is also intended to help with drawing line art. I don't have a lot of space on my desk, so I don't have a lot of room to move my entire arm like a lot of people recommend that you do when doing line work to get those effortlessly smooth lines. I'm also just in the habit of drawing with my wrist, and since, like I said, I don't have a lot of desk space, I'm not feeling particularly inclined to break that habit. Because of this, I have trouble drawing longer lines. For example, the ponytails on this Miku drawing I did about a week back. For longer static lines with not much directional variation, I just zoom out so there's less ground I have to cover when drawing. It's just the opposite of zooming in to get the little details right. Once I get the line down, I zoom back in to change up the line weight if I deem it necessary in some areas a little bit, but it just makes the process of getting the lines down a lot easier. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. I know some of these were pretty simple, but some people aren't aware of them, so if I can help anyone make drawing a little easier, then I feel like I've done my job. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing, and leave me some suggestions in the suggestions in the comments on what to do next. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Suggestions. Some suggestions. Suggestions. Some suggestions. Suggestions.